There you go. Move it around anywhere you need it. You've already got your green light on.
Okay.
There you go. Go ahead and raise your right hand. Do you swear or affirm the testimony you're about to provide is true and accurate?
Yes, I do.
Thank you. Ms. Ryan.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Ms. Salmon. Are you the same Sandy Salmon who filed direct testimony in this docket on July 24th, 2023?
Yes, I did.
If I asked you those same questions today, would you have approximately the same answers?
Yes, I would.
Do you have any corrections to make to that testimony?
No, I don't.
Your Honor, I move to admit the pre-filed direct testimony and exhibits of Senator Sandy Salmon.
Are there objections? Seeing no objections, the board will admit the evidence. Give it the way due.
And I would tender the witness for cross-examination.
Mr. Whippel.
Thank you, Your Honor. Senator Salmon. Just one question for you, and it's the same question that I asked the last couple legislators. How do you think the board should weigh the significant federal tax subsidies available for sequestration in terms of this permit granting process?
I believe that the board should consider, the primary job is to consider whether this project meets the requirement in our U.S. Constitution and the Iowa Constitution of public use, and whether it meets the state requirement of convenience and necessity. And so the issue of the tax credits is really, in my mind, an extraneous issue to the questions that would be before the board.
Are the tax credits to be considered a cost or a benefit?
Well, I'm in the legislature and we appropriate funding, and tax credits are always considered a cost.
Thank you. That's all I have, Your Honor.
Mr. Taylor.
Thank you. Senator Salmon, what counties are in your Senate district?
I represent Bremer County, Butler County, Chickasaw County, and all of Floyd except for 2 townships.
Okay. So, does that mean the Summit Pipeline goes through 2 of the counties, Floyd and Chickasaw?
Yes.
You said that you've heard from your constituents. Is that one of the reasons that you've chosen to intervene here?
Yes, it is.
Okay. What are you hearing from your constituents?
Well, I'm hearing that constituents are very upset about the taking of their land, of easements on their farmland and land for what they consider not to be a public use, not for convenience and necessity. They, that's basically what the most important objections I've heard from people is the feeling that they are losing control of their land that they've invested in, and they're wondering how far that a large company will be allowed to go, will be allowed to be successful to take control over their land. It's as simple as that. They've invested in their land, and when you've invested in something, you don't want to lose what you have.
When you talk to your constituents, do you get the feeling that they feel like they have no choice but to assign easements or give in to Summit?
There's been a number of constituents that I have talked to that feel that way. They feel like they've been badgered, hounded, harassed, phoned repeatedly to urged them to sign, and some under threat that if they do not sign, that their land will be taken by eminent domain. Not everyone has had that experience, but I've heard it from enough of them that they're concerned.
So Representative Holt talked about the eminent domain bill that passed the House this past session, but I didn't get considered by the Senate. Do you know why the Senate didn't take it up?
Well, I could speculate, but I don't want to, give a speculation that I don't know is really true. I know that I know from some senators that there was concern about the ethanol industry, and they were wanting to support the ethanol industry, and they felt like this would do that. I know that was a concern, and there could be other concerns, but they were not voiced to me. I know that myself and a number of other senators spoke with Senate leaders and did not get anywhere with our efforts to get legislation considered. For example, legislation that Senator Jeff Taylor brought forward to be considered. It appeared that the door was solidly shut and locked on that, and that efforts to have it be considered in the Senate were like talking to a brick wall.
Under legislative procedure, is that still a live bill in this next session?
Yes, they are all still live rounds for next session.
Okay. Thank you. That's all the questions I have.
Thank you. Mr. Jorde?
Yes, in your experiences in the last legislative session, would you say that Summit Carbon Solutions and its lobbyists were opposed to the landowner protection legislation that was proposed?
Yes.
And, ma'am, as between looking at the profitability of 13 ethanol plants and whether or not they make a little more money each year or not versus hundreds of concerned landowners, where do you fall in that balancing test as between who we should give more weight to?
Well, when I signed up to be a legislator and decided to run for office and I was elected, I swore an oath to uphold and defend the Constitution. And both constitutions, the U.S. Constitution and the Iowa Constitution, and it's very clear in those constitutions that private land is not to be taken, but for public use and fair compensation be given. And so I consider that my first duty as a state senator, to defend the rights of my constituents that are outlined in those documents. So it didn't seem to be a big balancing question for me. I think we are so used to having our property rights protected in this country that we take it for granted. We don't know what it's like to live in a country where if you fix up your business or you make improvements on your land, why, you have a government official come along and say, that looks great, I think I'll take that. So there's no incentive for investing in your property. And so the owners of the property, they lose their freedom, and the country loses its prosperity. property rights are essential to both liberty and prosperity. You have to protect them. It's a really serious issue that we're faced with here, and especially that the board is faced with having to determine here.
Would you agree that the narrative that it has, you're either, for ethanol or you're against it in terms of landowners versus ethanol plants is really a false choice, or where do you weigh in on that?
Absolutely, it's a false choice. My record in the legislature has been one of supporting the ethanol industry. I supported the move to the 15 E standard, 15% standard. I've supported the tax credits and the various funding for renewable fuel infrastructure that we've had through the years, through my many years in the legislature. So I am very supportive of the ethanol industry. I'm an investor in an ethanol plant. So that it is not a question of that. The provisions of the Constitution were put in place just to make sure that a more powerful economic interest would not overpower a smaller economic interest, would not overpower a property owner. That's the primary issue here, as I see it. And the economic issues are secondary.
Would you agree that you could be supportive of the ethanol industry in Iowa and landowner rights, and frankly this project, if you simply removed the path of eminent domain for Summit Carbon Solutions?
Yes, I'm a supporter of the ethanol industry, and I'm a supporter of property rights both. There's no reason that you can't be a supporter of both.
So as long as the landowner would have the option to say no thank you, and not have a path to be forced to give up their property rights, then you would be okay with that?
Yes, there's, as far as that issue is concerned, there are other issues related to this project that are of a concern that I think would need to be addressed. But the question of whether or not to approve the use of eminent domain for this project hinges on whether it's a public use or for the convenience and necessity. That's the thing to decide. That's what's got to be decided. And then once that's decided, besides that question, there are other questions and concerns. I'm not saying that's the only concern. There are other things to think about with this project. But the decision of whether or not to grant the power of eminent domain hinges on whether it's determined that it's a public use and meets the convenience and necessity specified in the Iowa law, and I don't believe it meets those requirements.
Thank you, Senator. Nothing further.
Thank you, Representative Eisenhart.
Thank you. 2, maybe 3 quick questions. Senator Salmon, is it a fair summary of your view, your testimony, that you do not believe a private company in this case should be granted eminent domain because the project is not for a public use?
That's true.
Is that your fairly summarized your testimony?
Yes.
If the applicant, if the person who wanted to build this pipeline were the state of Iowa, would that be a public use in your mind?
That would encompass many other questions, and among them is questions concerning the man-made climate change issues and carbon dioxide issues and so forth and so on. That is not, I'm not going to get into all those issues because I'm trying to focus it on what we need to talk about here. And I got to say something, other things that I think are important.
Well, maybe perhaps in redirect you can get that from your own attorney. Basically, you said that you did not say yes or no would be on its face a public use or not a public use because the state was building the pipeline. There would be other factors that would need to be considered.
Yes.
That's basically what you said.
Yes.
And you said you didn't want to address climate change, but one of the things that Summit Carbon Solutions is proposing to do is to remove and prevent carbon dioxide to get from getting into the atmosphere. And I asked a previous witness, could that be a public necessity? If the state were to build a pipeline to protect its citizens from the destructions caused by climate change, could that be a public use?
Well, I disagree with the premise of your question. I think it's beyond the scope of the question that's before the board.
I agree.
But I would not, think, but to answer your question, I wouldn't consider that a public use.
Thank you.
Ms. Ryan, redirect? I didn't miss anybody, did I? Okay. Ms. Ryan.
Only if the board members have questions.
Looks like it's your turn for redirect.
Okay. Just one question. You were trying to say something additional when Representative Eisenhart suggested that you could finish that sentence on redirect. So what were you trying to say at that point in time?
Yeah, and I'm sorry. I didn't know I would have another chance to say something, and I was trying to get it in, but I didn't mean to not answer your question. I guess as I thought about this more, the very fact that Summit Carbon is still pursuing this project in an agricultural state where landowners depend heavily on private property rights being protected to make their investments, and the fact that Summit Carbon is still willing to take, through the government power of eminent domain, a full 1/3 of its route across the entirety of our whole state, over 900 pieces of land, over 450 landowners, is, to me, is absolutely breathtaking. It's breathtaking. I am almost 70 years old and I've never seen anything like this. To me, this is outrageous, reprehensible, brazen, and shameless action, and all Iowans can see it. That's all.
That's all the questions I have. Thank you, Your Honor.
Okay. Thank you. You may step down. Appreciate it.
Thank you.